The Giller Prize, which is the biggest literary prize in this country, just announced this big change to how the prize is chosen. Usually, a bunch of authors get together, they make up the jury, and they decide the book that wins. But this year, the Gillers have announced this big change, and the change is this. The change is that it's going to be independent booksellers, a jury of 7 different independent booksellers. They're going to be the ones to determine the winning book. And so I talked to Anju Gogia. She's the manager of Another Story Bookshop here in Toronto. And the conversation was about this. The conversation was about how this sort of change comes to be and what it could kind of actually imply for the prize itself. And here's what I found really interesting. Up until I talked to Anju about this, I actually had not considered that this could be, in some realm, a kind of conflict of interest, because booksellers are also, part of how they make a living is selling books. And so this gets a little bit more complicated and more murky than I maybe initially thought it was. And so I really appreciated Anju's insights. I think you will too. Get into it. Anju, how are you, pal?
I'm great. Thanks for having me here today.
Nice to see you. Okay, let's talk about this big change. What was your initial reaction to the news?
Well, I was completely shocked. I was completely flummoxed. This is a huge change to how the Giller juries have been announced.
Normally it's a bunch of authors, right?
Yeah, with some industry professionals thrown in over the years. But yes, generally the last many years have been authors, right?
Yeah.
And so this announcement comes out, and, those of us in the industry watch the Gillers very closely. Mm-hmm. And we were like, what in the world just happened?
You're flummoxed.
Absolutely flummoxed.
Tell me why.
Well, in the past, it's always been authors. And, I have to say the juries for the last many years have been great. Really good diversity of authors. The chairs have been great. The last 2 years, there's been a lot of stuff going on with the Gillers. But the thing that all of us noticed, the picture comes out, and it is 7 white booksellers from across the country. So there's the optics of that, but also just booksellers, 7 booksellers. Complete shift for the Giller Prize. And I would argue for most literary prizes in this country, you don't see an all bookseller panel, as jurors.
I want to come back to the makeup of the jury in just a moment. But this idea of moving from authors to booksellers, what does that signal to you? Like, does that, because you talk about being flummoxed by it, but does that sound like a welcome kind of shift, do you think? As a concept?
As a concept, not entirely, no. I think there's a lot of questions about why didn't they ask writers? Is it because they couldn't get enough writers to be on it? Is it because, they just, the press release said that they wanted a People's Choice Award. They're going for a different direction. But there's a lot of ways you can do a different direction, that are not just booksellers.
Yeah, you're referencing, so that when you talk about the press release, like that was one of the phrases they said, that this brings it closer to being a People's Choice kind of version of the prize.
Yeah.
You've also been having a lot of conversations about this online. What's kind of struck you about how people are talking about this?
People are not happy with this. They are surprised. Again, the issue of it being all white is a major, major issue that I have seen across many platforms and across many conversations. That's a huge issue. The second issue is that why only booksellers? There's questions about, is this a conflict of interest? Because we're all financially incentivized to sell books, right? It's coast to coast. There's no Quebecois booksellers as well. That is an issue for some people. So there are several different issues at work here. And fundamentally, and I think we can talk about this in a bit, it doesn't change the fact that the Giller has been going through some major issues the last few years. And this does nothing to solve that.
I want to talk a little bit about, so let's talk about the lineup that we're talking about here. I haven't, the conversations I'm seeing are like, oh, interesting direction. Let's see how this plays out, as opposed to sort of saying, like, I'm not so sure about this. So I mentioned that this is the first time the Gillers have had a jury made up of entirely bookstore owners and booksellers. 7 jurors in total, 5 different booksellers. Between them, they run bookstores in 8 different provinces and 1 territory. All their names have been made public. Look, I've seen the same picture that you have. I'm not sure I can equivocally say that they're all definitely white. I don't know them personally, not all of them anyway. But tell me about how you're feeling about this lineup, the idea of like trying to go coast to coast to coast as a conception of like, okay, let's capture booksellers across the country and maybe, I guess, tastes across the country.
Well, I think tastes can be measured in many different ways.
Sure.
Look, like you've got a city like Toronto, which has a, amazing array of independent bookshops, and we each cater to different tastes. So I wouldn't necessarily argue that a geographical representation represents tastes across the country.
Fair
right?
enough. Yeah.
And I think you can get at tastes in many different ways. So coast to coast is one way to do it. I'm not convinced it's the right way. right?
Okay.
I'm not convinced.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've been thinking about, as have many others, is that you could have had a jury that was made up of non-writers who are industry professionals. Why not have a librarian? Why not have literary festival directors on this, right? Why not have some academics? Why not have one writer?
Yeah.
I think to have one bookseller on the jury is great. I don't think we need 7.
Okay, so let's just quickly go through where these booksellers are, the jurors are. So we've got someone in Yellowknife. We've got somebody in Charlottetown. Chris Hall owns McNally Robinson at Winnipeg and Saskatoon. I met Chris earlier this year.
He's great.
He's a lovely fella. Kelowna, BC, and then we go to Fredericton, and then Danielle and Ben McNally and McNally Books here in Toronto. So as far as we can tell, yeah, there is all of this sort of like regional representation. But as far as we can tell also, again, it's hard to say with the picture, right? But I don't know them individually.
I've met many of them.
Yeah.
I do know them. They're lovely people.
Yes.
Elamin, they're lovely people.
Yeah. It's not about the individual booksellers.
No, they're lovely people. And I'm not on here to say, like, I know them. They're great. They do wonderful things for book selling in this country, right?
Yeah.
They are white.
Okay.
I can tell you there's no racialized booksellers on that jury.
Okay, I defer to you on that. But tell me about why it might have been one of the thoughts that you sort of advanced, and I think I've seen other people advance, is like it might have been difficult to get BIPOC people on this jury. Why might that be?
Absolutely.
For the Gillers?
Because I think many of us would have said no with the Gillers as it is. So listen, I've been in this industry for close to 30 years. In 2022, I won the Freedom to Read Award by the Writers' Union of Canada for my work promoting diverse literature and, working with diverse authors around the country. They could have asked me. They didn't, because I would have said no. What I would have said is, let's talk about a process to reconcile with the Canadian literature community, right? I think they would have
You're
had a
talking
problem.
about the last couple of years
Absolutely.
of the Gillers and the sort of the conflicts that they've been having with some folks in the literary scene in terms of where the funding is coming from.
Where the funding is coming from, not just where the funding is coming from, but also the other issues that have come out. There's been a lot of comments. There's been a lot of things on socials, right, that have hurt a lot of writers.
Sure.
And there needs to be a reconciliation between the Gillers and the broader CanLit community. I think any BIPOC booksellers they would have asked, I mean, unequivocally, I can't say that they would have all said no, but many of us would have said no without a process to move forward and do some healing, right?
Yeah.
Not just healing, but answer some hard questions as well.
I'm trying to sort of like sit in both that reality, the idea that like that healing is necessary, and I don't know how that begins or how it goes, and also sort of zoom out and say, what does a bookseller bring to a jury like this, right? Like what does that vantage point sort of bring to a jury like this? I guess in its ideal form, like this format of, okay, that's who's going to determine who wins this prize.
I mean, booksellers are some of the best people to talk to about books,
They
right?
sure
This
are.
is what we do every single day. We read books. We love books. Our bread and butter is books. Our breathing life is books, right? So are we well placed to judge books? Absolutely, you know. But I also want to say there's already a bookseller list out there chosen by booksellers across the country. It's called the Bookseller List. That's been, put together by the Canadian Independent Booksellers Association. They've done a lot of work the last 2 years polling booksellers across the country, and not just the managers and the owners, but every single staff person at every single independent bookstore has contributed to what's called the Booksellers List. Go check it out, right?
That's already available, is what
That's
you're saying.
already available. So in some ways, this prize is almost like, well, there's already a bookseller list. We don't need the Giller to be choosing a bookseller list as well, because that already exists. Right?
I want to go back to the thing that you mentioned earlier, because I hadn't thought about that, this idea that there could be a conflict of interest at play here. Do you want to just like explain that a little bit more?
So this is a question that people have, that booksellers are financially incentivized, right? Like we all
they want
know
to sell books.
They want to sell books, and we all know that the Giller is the #1 book-selling award engine in this country.
The sticker that says this book won the Giller, it moves copies.
It absolutely moves more copies than anything else, you know. And there's other amazing awards, and I wish all the awards would move as many copies as the Gillers. But the truth is, the Giller has moved more. So people have raised a lot of questions to me and on my socials about there are financial incentives as a bookseller, right? What does that mean when your whole panel is booksellers? And truth be told, we're still in a capitalist world, right? We still have to pay rent off the sale of each book. So there are questions about that. The other question is, it's kind of like a messy process right now. You know, you've got 7 booksellers from 5 different bookstores. You've got 2 bookstores, the Bookmark and Ben McNally, that are represented by 2 staff. What does that mean for the jury process, right? Like, are they each going to read the same books? Are they going to split the books? Are they going to be having the same weight when they're having jury discussions? There's a lot of questions that I don't think have been answered. And that is also an issue for people. And you know what, Elamin? Authors can go into anxiety spirals when it comes into awards. And I can tell you, all these booksellers, we're all on socials promoting books. What are you going to do if an author is a book that was submitted in the spring and that bookseller is promoting their staff picks in the fall and their book isn't on there? I worry about that, right? Because we are a community that kind of lives with anxiety and a bit of spiraling, to be honest.
That's why we turn to books in the first place.
Exactly.
I got about a minute left here. In terms of, you talked about this idea of reconciliation and healing when it comes to the sort of Canadian literary community and with the Gillers. Does that feel possible to you? What needs to happen in order for that to sort of become maybe a reality?
Listen, healing is always possible. Healing is always possible. The Giller needs to answer, are they still being funded by the Israeli Foundation and by Indigo? These are questions that have been asked that have not been answered. When the Giller is going to the federal government to ask for $5 million in federal funding and they're not disclosing their funding sources, that is an issue. So that's one thing that needs to be answered. The second thing is there needs to be a conversation between, the folks from the CanLit Response, from the folks that signed the Giller letters and the Giller Foundation to say, let's talk about what's happened and how do we move forward. The truth is, the broader Canadian literary community wants the Giller in our lives. We love the Giller. We all had fun, seeing with the long list, the short list. Those of us who got to go to the gala, it was fun. We got to dress up. But we need a process of healing and of reconciliation and of open, honest conversations. And there needs to be some accountability for some of the stuff that's happened, for a lot of the things that have happened over the last 2 years. That is possible. I'm telling you right now, I'd be happy to help in that. Right?
Anju,
that needs to happen.
I appreciate your point of view. I appreciate you coming into the studio today. Thank you so much, friend.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Good to see you. Anju Gogia is the manager of Another Story Bookshop in Toronto. She joined me here in studio.